So there's a theory out there that says the reason Bitcoin isn't worth several $100,000 by now is because it's being manipulated by the banks. You might have seen this on Twitter. People have been revolting against JP Morgan for allegedly shorting a company called MicroStrategy. Now, MicroStrategy is a company whose whole purpose is just to raise money so that it can buy Bitcoin. And at one point, very recently, the price of the stock went down to a level where the value of the whole company was $10 billion less than the value of all of its Bitcoin holdings. And that meant by buying MicroStrategy, investors were basically able to buy Bitcoin at a discount. Now, when I first heard about this, I didn't really want to make that video about the banks because it was just a rumor. But I started researching anyway, and what I found is one of the most interesting stories in all of history about something called the death or debt spiral. Now, I want to give credit to a publication in the Journal of Economics released in 2004. And what that paper found was that companies using structures that mechanically looked like what MicroStrategy is doing today ended up having their stock prices collapse. How? So let me give you a simple example throughout history, and then hopefully later on it'll all make sense. Back in the late 1800s, the Ottoman Empire borrowed a lot of money from the French and British banks, but their debt was denominated in gold. And then in 1873, the world went through one of the first big global financial crises. The European banks stopped lending, interest rates went way up, and all of a sudden, the Ottomans couldn't create new bonds to pay for the old ones. At the same time, their currency was getting weaker, and how that looked like to them is the same way things look like to us today, which is things relative to that money go up in price. In this case, gold. We're like, oh look, gold is becoming more valuable. No, your currency is just getting weaker. Okay, so eventually the Ottomans couldn't pay it back and they defaulted. But the banks were like, you still owe us money though, right? So in return, the bondholders, which were the French and British banks, forced the Ottomans to create a new institution called the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. It was basically a foreign group of bankers that took control of the empire and their money, specifically the control of how taxes were collected and paid back to them. Now, this happens time and time again throughout history though. Greece, for example, more recently borrowed hundreds of billions of euros, a money they could not print more of themselves.